I want to take you back to a time that maybe you remember, which I did when I was 16, which was filling out your first employment application. Mine was for this little tiny bank in rural Dixie County, Florida. And it was in 1979. And I remember getting the form and seeing the form and looking at it. A lot of boxes, a lot of lines. I have no idea what I said. I have no idea what I checked, but I knew I was going to answer every single question they wanted because I wanted a job. And surprisingly, they hired me. You know, as we've all gotten older, we've filled out those employment applications. And the questions have probably gotten more difficult. Google was infamous for having extremely difficult questions. One of their questions was, what is the degree of angle between the hour hand and the minute hand of a clock when the time is 3:15? Now, I think I ought to get hired just because I can remember the question. And then there's employers that just ask entirely stupid questions. Stupid questions, and this one's real. What are the leadership skills required to cook a chicken? Now, if you ever see that on an employment application, the only question you ought to ask yourself is, why would I ever want to work here? But you know, if you're in that situation and you are filling out an application, there are some questions you can't refuse. Such as, have you ever been convicted of a crime? That's a box that you would have to check. Now, for most of us, we don't have to check that box, and it's just merely an annoying question. And we skip over that. But if you have been convicted of a crime, and you answer that question honestly, your application most likely will be discarded. You probably won't be interviewed, and you almost certainly won't be hired. Now, for 28 years, I have practiced labor and employment law, and I represent the company side only. And this is a very routine call I have received over the years. Phone rings, I pick it up, client comes on and says, I need to ask you about an application that we've received. Person has great qualifications and all the job skills that we want, pause, but they've checked the box indicating they have a criminal record. Pause. Do I have to hire the person? And I sit back and I think about it, and I give the same answer I've been giving all these years, which is no. Legally, you do not have to hire that person. You are perfectly free to say you wish to hire somebody else. You are perfectly free to decide that the risk of hiring that person is too great, either because of what you think may happen or the fear of getting sued if it does. So you say to the applicant, I'm sorry, we found somebody better qualified, and you move on, and it's the very safe thing to do, isn't it? And there are many stories of successes of ex-offenders being hired, and we should look at those and see the success they have. But there's a story I'd like to tell you, which I really can't tell you fully today. It's a story of a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine, who had his first scrape with the law at age 11. He has did spend the better part of his adult life incarcerated. He was released in his late 40s and only recently has completed all probationary requirements. Now, he has done very well. He found a job, someone hired him, he has been promoted, and he's now even supervising other employees. But why aren't you looking on the screen at his picture? And why haven't I told you his name? Because he doesn't want his identity known. He wouldn't allow me to tell you his name or show you his picture. It's because he's afraid of what would happen if others found out about his background. He is afraid that his employer's customers would cause his employer to fire him if they knew who he was and where he was working. And he's afraid that he would not be able to find another job if that were the case. So I started thinking about this again as an employment lawyer. I think about how people work and where people work and how people work and all of that. And it occurred to me this cycle that we are in can be very endless and expensive. And it reminded me of that quote by Albert Einstein when he said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So today I want to present to you an alternative, a simple alternative that I think can maybe start to break this endless and expensive cycle. And the alternative is this, that it is cheaper to hire than it is to jail. Very simple. It is cheaper to hire than it is to jail. Now, some of you are nodding your heads, but before you really accept that alternative, you have to confront a couple of issues, and we'll talk about these. The three issues are cost, public safety, and fear. So let's talk about all three. Well, we have to start with cost because that's where we start everything, right? Cost. Now, cost in this issue is extremely high. In the state of Florida, for instance, 1 out of every $9 spent in Florida state government is for corrections. Nationally, it costs $28,000 a year, or about $76 a day, to incarcerate someone. And somebody has to pay that tab, right? If each of you were to pay this solely by state sales tax, you would have to buy $400,000 worth of stuff to pay for the cost of one person to be incarcerated for 1 year. Still think that doesn't affect you economically? Now, we have to also look at what is lost when we have these very high costs. For instance, it is estimated that because of the very poor job prospects of ex-offenders, the gross domestic product is reduced by $57 to $65 billion a year annually. And we look at what we can gain by that, because it's estimated that for every ex-offender who goes back on the rolls, the employment rolls, taxpayers receive $2,600. You see, economically then, I think it makes sense to do anything to turn criminals into taxpayers. It truly is cheaper to hire than it is to jail. But cost alone is not going to drive you to that conclusion. You have to address the real elephant in the room, which is public safety. What happens to public safety when ex-offenders are hired? Well, let's start with the fact that at any given time in the United States, about 1.5 million people are incarcerated. This year alone, 700,000 of those individuals will be released. They have to go somewhere and they have to do something. They are given $50 in their pocket and a bus ticket home, but what do they do when they get there? There was a fascinating interview in September of this year with an ex-offender named Richard Cabral. He did an interview that came on National Public Radio, and he bluntly stated the correlation between employment and public safety. When he did, he said this: "Nothing stops a bullet like a job." And he's right. Nothing stops a bullet like a job. A 2011 study found that employment is the single greatest influence on reducing recidivism. Ex-offenders who receive employment have on average a 16% recidivism rate compared to a national rate of over 52%. And what I find even so compelling is the fact that even employment for a short period of time can have a remarkable impact. Employment as little as 30 days can reduce recidivism to 20%. Now, those of us who live here in Jacksonville are fortunate because we have a model right here, and it's Operation New Hope. Operation New Hope is one of the nation's leading ex-offender and training programs. Their results are compelling. 15% recidivism rate for ex-offenders who go through training and who are hired, 70% for those who don't. But maybe the most compelling statistic of all is the fact that there is a 70% retention rate for all of those offenders who are hired. What employer wouldn't want to have a turnover rate that low and a retention rate that high? You see, we can address cost and we can address public safety, but there is a final factor that you have to address as well, and it's the factor of fear. It's a factor that is more powerful than even money or safety, if you can believe that. It's my friend's fear of not being able to have others see beyond his past. It's an employer's real fear of what happens if I hire this person and something goes wrong. So how do we overcome this? This can have a real impact, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. You know, as an employer is thinking about whether to hire somebody, sometimes there is paralysis by analysis, of wondering whether I should hire this person and what happens if I do. There was a study called The Mark of a Criminal Record and found two things that were quite compelling to me. Number one, 50% of employers simply are unwilling to even consider an applicant who has a criminal record. And number two, of those applicants who are even considered, if there's a criminal record, the likelihood of a callback interview is reduced by 50%. So these three things, cost, public safety, and fear, can really make an issue as to whether we can make a change on this very important issue. So what do we do? Well, I want to suggest a couple things to you, and they're really quite simple. So let's start with this: ban the box. Now go back to that employment application that we all talked about at the very beginning. And imagine being required to disclose on that application the very worst thing you ever did. To factually and specifically write down the worst thing you've ever done, and maybe even point to the public record which shows the world what you did. Would you be reluctant, embarrassed, or nervous? Sure you would. That's what ban the box is designed to eliminate. Ban the box is real simple. It says that on an employment application itself, you cannot ask about a criminal record. It does not, however, say that you're never going to ask that question. it delays the timing of the question until much later in the employment process, usually even after a conditional offer is given. You see, it's not a question of whether, it's a question of when. And we all know timing makes a huge difference in everything that we do. But which allows an employer to make a more informed choice? A little box with a check mark in it, or sitting down and talking to someone about the facts and circumstances of the conviction? Does a box really tell you how old the person was when the offense occurred? Does a box tell you what was going on in their lives at the time? And maybe most importantly, does a box tell you what has happened with the individual since? What are you hiring, a box or a person? The city of Durham, North Carolina, was one of the first to ban the box. And since they did, though, the number of applicants that they've had with people that have a criminal record has nearly tripled. Under their ordinance, a person can only be asked about a criminal record after they've already been recommended for hire. And here's what's happened. 96.8% of those applicants who applied for employment, who were recommended for hire, and who also had a criminal record, ultimately got the job. Now, nationwide, ban the box movement is growing. You see there in the states, highlighted in blue, are the 19 states that have currently banned the box, sometimes for public sector employment, sometimes for private sector employment. 100 cities and counties, including 6 in Florida, have banned the box as well. Sometimes we say, well, this is just, all about social do-goodism, and, why not do this? Well, the reason we do this is because it's grounded in cold, hard economic reality. In February 2015, Governor Nathan Deal of Georgia signed an executive order banning the box in Georgia, and look at the reason he gave for doing this. Ban the box hiring policies enhances Georgia's reputation as the #1 place in which to do business by increasing qualified applicant pools and improving the likelihood that the employer will identify the best candidate for the position. You see, banning the box is a good first step, but it's not the only step. While banning the box may stop the near certain disqualification solely based on that little box, applicants must be given a full and fair consideration of employment as well. In Jacksonville, we passed an ordinance which requires the city government to give full and fair consideration of applicants as they are being considered for not only city government hire, but for work with contractors that do business with the city. Jacksonville was the first and one of the few cities to do this. Now, understand why we did this. We did this as a way of reducing crime by putting people to work. Now, all of you might be a bit skeptical at this point, and judgments clearly have to be made. Nobody is suggesting that every ex-offender ought to be hired. Judgments have to be made. For instance, nobody is saying that a convicted embezzler should be hired at a bank. And nobody is saying that a convicted sex offender should work at a daycare center. But can't we eliminate some of the 800 jobs nationally and 402 in the state of Florida for which a person may be disqualified solely because of a criminal record? Does it really make sense to say that all ex-offenders can't work as a cosmetologist, a geologist, a mold remediator, or even a septic tank contractor? We have to be thoughtful about the individuals that we're affecting. But there's a final piece. If we're really going to make this work, if we're going to save money, if we're going to improve public safety, and we're going to reduce employers' fear by hiring these ex-offenders, there's a final piece which has to happen, and that's training. You see, training is something important for all of us. You wouldn't expect to get a job if you weren't trained, were you? And we don't expect employers to hire untrained or unskilled people. And that's why there is ample evidence which shows that ex-offenders who are trained, even while in prison, are likely to not only succeed in their job, but again, not commit another crime. The Rand Corporation in 2013 found that ex-offenders who received training even while in prison were 43% less likely to return to prison than those ex-offenders who weren't. Training is so important to make all of this work. But as we think about this issue, it really comes down to something quite simple. And that is, how are we going to treat people to give them the opportunity to succeed just as we want to succeed? When I meet people for the first time and start a conversation, normally I have 2 default questions just to get the conversation going. Number 1, where are you from? And number 2, what do you do? All of us can answer where we're from because we're all from somewhere, right? But if you're this group that we've been talking about, ex-offenders, that second question gets to be very difficult because they, the majority, have a desire to work just like the rest of us. but yet there are the impediments to getting there that we've all talked about. Because, as sociologist Peter Worsley has stated, work is so central to our culture. But despite all of our good intentions, stupid questions will persist. Somebody somewhere is going to ask, how many times a day do the hands of a clock overlap? As if that were some great indicator of their ability to do a job. But there are also times when our desire to save money meshes with improved public safety and even allows us to improve the lives of others at the same time. This is one of those unique times when we can cut cost, we can be fair, we can be safe, and we can put people to work because it is cheaper to hire than it is to jail. Thank you very much.